What's up everybody, welcome back to our security camera system project. So this is probably going to be the last episode and we're going to add the camera controls and finish the widget for the security screen. So let's get started. First we're gonna add some stuff in the security terminal, so let's open up the blueprint for it and we're gonna create an event to cycle through the cameras. So I'm gonna create a new custom event and call that CycleCameras. So first of all, I'm gonna check if I'm the server, like I did 100 of times before. So I want to make sure that everything runs on the server. So let's check to make sure. Then I'm gonna add another branch in here and I'm gonna drag it onto the custom event node to create a condition, and I want to know if I want to cycle up or down. So I'm gonna say cycle up. And I also want to add another input, and that's going to be the user player controller. So the user controller, and that's my first person controller. So like this. So first we are going to check if, let me see, if our scene capture component for the camera we're using is valid, because it might be destroyed if the camera is destroyed. So first of all, let's get our array of cameras in here and let's get our current camera. So the current index. And for this we want to get our scene capture component. And we want to check if this is valid. No, not that one. You want the question mark one. So this one. So connect this up. And if it's valid, we're gonna set the visibility and we're gonna make sure that it's not visible. So we're gonna set the next camera to be visible and disable this one. So drag off the capture component and set the visibility. So by setting the visibility, you can switch them on and off. So make sure the new visibility is false, and then if it's not valid, we don't need to do anything else. So we're gonna increase our camera index. So get the current camera index here and let's increase it by 1. So increment. Connect them up and make sure you also connect the not valid one as well. So like this. Then we are going to continue by making sure that we are not exceeding our camera array. So let's get the array in here, camera blueprints, and let's get our length. So get the length of the array, and we want to make sure, let me double check. So if it's equal to our current index, then we are going to set it back to 0. So let's add a branch in here and connect this to the condition and make sure we set it back to 0 if this is true. So if the length of the array is 2 and our current index is also 2, that's not going to work. So we need to make sure that we reset it back to 0. So if we cycle too far up, we're going to start back at the beginning again. So that's what we did over here. Then we're going to get another branch in here, connect the false pin as well as the setter. So we are good to go. And again, we want to get our current camera. So we're going to get the camera and we're going to get our current index. So get copy current index. And we want to know if our new camera is destroyed. So we already increased it by 1. So we are with the new camera and we want to know if it's destroyed or not. So get is destroyed. And plug it in the bool. Or a branch, I'm sorry. So if it's destroyed, we're going to set our current camera to true, and if it's false, we're going to set the scene capture component to be visible, so it's going to activate. So we can drag off this getter over here and get the scene capture component, and we want to set it to be visible, so set visibility and set the visibility true. So we are enabling the new camera, and let's make sure that we set the current camera offline to false, just to make sure. So, and from now on, we want to make sure if we are a local controller or not, so we're going to update the screens. So we're going to get our user controller in here, so that's this one, and we might just want to set it as a variable. Let me double check. We can just plug it in, so I'm going to drag off here. And I'm gonna say is local player controller, and if it's a local controller, it's the server, because we are server side. We already determined that at the beginning here. So if it's not a local controller, it's a client. So we're gonna work from that. And first of all, we want to update the camera name on the widget. So let's get the current camera index. And let's get our camera name. And then let me see, we can get it from the controller. So if we drag off the user controller over here, and we can update the camera name from here, because we already added those events. So update camera name. I'm the server, so I can call the normal version. Make sure you plug in the variable. Then we want to make sure that we show the offline screen if we need to. So we're gonna get off the first person controller again, and we're gonna say show offline screen. Let me see, how did I call that? Yeah, it should be show offline screen. So again, you can use the normal version, and for is offline, we're gonna drag in our current camera offline variable. And this is for the widget of the client. So now we also need to update the screen on the actual terminals. So we're gonna set the multicast screen material as well. So we're gonna drag off here and call our multicast set screen material. And make sure that we set the screen of the security terminals to the correct version as well. So either the offline screen or the render target. So that's what this function is doing. And then we are good to go over here. So we need to do the same thing for the client. So we can drag off the player controller and call the client update camera name. Plug this into the false pin, and again make sure you connect the actual name variable as well. Then for the show offline screen, we also have a client version, so let's call that one as well. Client show offline screen, and plug in the variable. So that's good to go, and then we can continue with our multicast event, so we can simply plug it in like that. So this should pretty much work, and now we need to do cycling down, so that's going to be pretty similar. First of all, we can just copy all of this stuff and connect it up to the false pin over here. So, no, that's wrong. We don't need this branch. You want to connect it to the isValid node. So I copied this branch as well. You don't need that. Then up until the set visibility node, you can copy it, and then you're not gonna increment the index, but you're gonna decrease it. So -1. Oh, the macro is a lot easier to use, so decrement int. There we go. Make sure you connect up the isNotValid pin as well. And now we want to add another check again, but this time we want to check if our current index is smaller than 0. So if we are exceeding our array bounds, we need to make sure that we reset it. So, oh, not this one. The current index that we just set. And if this is smaller than 0, then we need to start at the end of the array. So we're going to set it to the length -1. So we're going to set our current index and then get the camera array, get the length, and make sure you subtract 1 of it and plug it into the new current index. And then we can simply continue for the isDestroyed branch. So we're going to plug in the setter over here and also plug in the false pin. So that should work. I think we have the CycleCamera set up over here. So now if we go to our PlayerController, so that's our first person controller, I'm going to add the input events in here. So I'm going to use the Z and the X key for the cycling up and down. So first let me get the keyboard X. And first of all, I want to know if my player input type is actually my security interface. So if I'm interacting with my interface. And then I want to know if my security terminal is valid. So I'm going to drag in my security terminal and I'm going to get an isValid node connected to the security interface pin over here. And now if it's valid, I want to know if we have authority or not. So it has authority. And if we are the server, we can simply call the CycleCamera event. So we can get in our security terminal and call our CycleCamera. And we are gonna cycle this one up. And we need a user player controller, so get a reference to ourselves. And if we are a client, we need to make sure that we replicate this, so we need a custom event for that. So let's create one. And that's going to be my server CycleCamera. So we're going to tell the server that we want to cycle cameras, and it's going to do that for us. So again, we're going to call the CycleCamera event from here. And then for the target and the cycle up, you want to plug them into the node directly. For the player controller, you can get a reference to self again. And now for the remote pin over here, we're going to call the server CycleCamera event. And then our target is going to be the security terminal, and we're going to cycle up. So make sure you enable the cycle up pin. And this should work if we set this to replicate to run on server on the right side over here. So make sure you set that as well. So now we can cycle up, and we're going to do the same thing for cycling down. So we're going to create another keyboard event. And we're going to pretty much copy everything, but we're going to set these to false. So let's get everything here. And we want to cycle down this time. So disable cycle up, and this should work. So we might as well just check it to see if things are working. So we need to add a second camera. So let's get our viewport up. And we're gonna drag in another one of our security cameras. So let me see. Over here. Let's get it a little bit aligned. And now we need to make sure that we add the security camera to the terminal as well. So if we select the terminal in the map over here, and for the camera blueprint array, we're going to add one element, and we get the little eyedropper over here and select the new camera. So it's added to the array, and now it belongs to this terminal as well. So now we should be able to cycle through those cameras using the Z and the X key. So let's interact with our terminal. So this is the first camera, and if I cycle, it's working, but the other camera is not moving. And that's because we didn't set any of the variables. So we have our camera pitch. We need to make sure that we set that. So something around -40. And the search angle, that's why it wasn't moving. So something about 80 degrees to the left and right. And you also need to assign a texture render target. So that needs to be the same one as the security terminal that you want to show it on. So make sure those two match as well. And then you can also assign a camera name. So camera B, for example. And now it should also move. So this time we're going to pick the client and see if that's working as well. So let's interact, camera A, and I can cycle up and down, and that's working. Now let's make sure that the screen is actually changing as well. So switch back to the client, and the screen on the terminal is also updating. So right now we can cycle through our cameras. That's cool. Let's see, let's add some stuff to our security green widget. So we're gonna add some controls in there. So let's add the controls to our security screen widget so the player knows what keys he needs to press. So I'm not much of an artist, so I'm gonna keep this really simple, and I'm just gonna get a vertical box in here. And I'm gonna drag it on the canvas panel. So make sure it's right below our screen. So let's drag it on the first canvas panel, that's a better idea. So it's on the back canvas panel, my fault. So I'm gonna call this first vertical box main controls. And I'm simply gonna add a text box in here. So let me get some text, drag it in here. And the first one is going to be for manual control. So let me see, we don't need to make these any variables, so we can leave them as they are, and I'm simply going to change the text over here. So I'm going to use E for manual control. Now let's make this look a little bit nicer, so I'm going to give it a little bit of a greenish color. And let's make it a little bit decent looking, something like this maybe. That should work fine. So the first one, E, is for manual control. So let's duplicate this one, and the second one is going to be cycling up, and then we have cycling down. So we're going to use Z for the previous camera. Duplicate it, and this is going to be our next camera, and that's the X key. And then I'm going to duplicate it one more time, and that's going to be quit. So I'm going to use Q to exit. So that should work. Now let me get the main controls over here selected, and I'm going to make this one a variable. So selected on the right side over here is variable. And then I'm going to duplicate the entire vertical box, and I'm going to call this one camera controls. Camera controls. So for the first one, it's going to be looking around. So you can look around with your mouse. Look around with mouse. Then we have the W to zoom in. Zoom in. And S to zoom out. And we're going to use Q again to go back to the previous menu. So I'm going to call it back in this case, and that should work. So the camera controls itself is also a variable. And for the camera controls, we want to make sure that it's on the exact same place. So let me see, size to content, and let's size the main controls to content as well. Then I'm just going to drag them on top of each other. And I'm gonna disable the visibility for the camera controls. So let me see, behavior visibility is hidden by default, and the main controls are visible. And now let's go to the graph, and we're gonna create a function to switch between them. So we're gonna create a custom event and call this show main controls. And let's get a branch in here so we can drag on the condition to create a variable, and this is going to be main controls visible. And then we're simply going to switch between them. So let's get the camera controls in here and let's get the main controls in here. So if the main controls are visible, we want to hide the camera controls. So set visibility, group in, let's hide camera controls, and let's make sure that the main controls are visible. And let's do it the other way around for the false pin. So visible, hidden, and plug them in as well. So we can switch between them now. Compile and save this. And let's see. Now first we need to make a few small changes here and there. So we're gonna go into our first person controller. Let me get it up over here. So we have the change input type event and we want to make a small change in here. So let's look for that. Change input type over here. And let me get my notes up. So we want to switch right over here. And we want to make sure that we show the correct controls. So we're going to switch on the input type that we just got from the node over here. So we can drag it over here, for example, and switch on input type. So if our new input type is our interface, then we're going to show the main controls. So we can get our security screen widget in here and drag off to get our show main controls event. So if we are in the interface, we want to show the main controls, and if we are in the camera control section, we want to hide the main controls, and that's going to show the camera controls. So that should work. Then we also need to create an event for the client for when the camera that he is controlling is being destroyed. So we need to make sure that we switch the input type then. So we're going to create a client version for that. So right click, create a custom event, and we'll call it client controlled camera destroyed. And then we want to make sure that we change our input type. So drag off, change input type. And we want to set it to our security interface. And then we want to reset our controlled camera variable, but we don't have one yet. So we're going to create it. New variable, controlled camera. So that's going to be a camera blueprint. So the security camera BP. And we do need to make sure that this is a replicated variable. So replicate it on the right side over here. And then we're going to drag it in for the controlled camera destroyed event and make sure that we reset it to being an empty variable. So that's good to go. We're going to use that later. And now we also need to update our camera destroyed event in the actual camera. So if we go to the blueprint, let's get the security camera blueprint up. So we have our event destroyed for the camera. And we need to change, or not really change, we need to add something in there. So let me get my notes in the correct position. So let me double check. I'm in the wrong blueprint, so we need to get our security terminal up, and over here we have a camera destroyed event. This one, and there we need to add some stuff. Sorry, my bad. So for the security terminal, and then we're going to change the input type if the camera is destroyed. So we can drag off the player controller over here, and if we are the server, we're going to change our input type directly. So change input type to our interface, so we're not controlling a camera anymore. And then we're going to set the controlled camera variable that we just created to be empty as well. So controlled camera, set it over here. So because I'm the server, I can do this directly. And if I'm the client, I need to call the client version of the event that we just created. So client controlled camera destroyed. And we're going to plug it in over here. So that's the event we created a few seconds ago. So this should work right now. And I think we are able to add the actual control stuff. So that's an error because we didn't compile the controller yet, probably. So we're good to go. Everything is compiled, so that's working. So we're going to add the control stuff in the camera first. So this time we do need to get the security camera blueprint up. And first of all, we're going to add a boolean, and that's going to be manual control. So is manual controlled. And we need to make sure that when it's controlled manually, that there is no input from the timeline and stuff like that. So let's go to the event tick and let's add a branch over here. So if are manually controlled, we're not going to do anything. And otherwise, we're just going to continue. And now we need to add the events for the actual input. So let's start by doing that. And let me see. We need a few of them, to be honest. So let's get a bit of empty room over here, and we're going to create custom events. So create a custom event. The first one is add yaw rotation. And we want to add a variable, and that's going to be the value, and that's a float. So we're gonna get the camera in here. So that's the camera lens component. And for that, we want to get our relative rotation. So get relative rotation. Let's split this, split the struct spin. And now we're gonna drag off the yaw and we're gonna add the value. So drag off yaw plus float and plug in the value over here. And then we also need to make sure that we are clamping this. So we're gonna drag off here and get a clamp angle node. And we want to clamp him to the search angle of the camera. So let's get our search angle in here. And the first one is going to be the maximum one. We can plug it in directly. And for the minimum one, let's duplicate it with -0. So float duplicated by float -1 and plug it into the minimum. Come on, there we go. And now we can simply set the relative rotation of the camera. So let's drag in the lens again and set relative rotation. And then we can split the struct pin over here and plug in the yaw and plug in the pitch directly from the relative rotation getter over here. So that should be good to go if we plug in the execution pin. And now we need to do the same kind of thing to add pitch. So let's add another custom event, add pitch rotation. And let me see, we can get the relative location from here. Then in this case, we're gonna add it to the pitch. But we need to do minus, so it makes more sense later on. So let's do minus, and then we need to get a variable in here, and that's the value again. Plug it into the minus node over here. So we're gonna clamp this, clamp angle. And this time it's the pitch, so we used the literal floats to clamp them, so they were -80 and 80. We set those in the construction script, I think. Yes, over here. So make sure those match. That makes a little bit more sense. And then we can set the relative rotation again, so get the camera and set relative rotation. This is going to be our new pitch, and get the yaw from over here. So that should work as well. Now we need an event to change the FOV. So custom event, add camera FOV. Again, this needs a value, so let's add a variable, and that's a value. Now we need to get our scene capture component, and for this we can drag off and get the FOV angle. I think we should. Oh really? Let me double check. So we need to search for field, and then we get the FOV angle. So get field of view, and this gets the FOV angle, to be nice and confusing. So okay, we're gonna drag off here and do float minus float, plug in the value over here, and let's clamp it as well. So clamp float, and let's clamp it between something like 25 and 100, and then we're gonna set the field of view of the capture component. So get it over here again, and set field of view. So this sets the FOV angle, and plug it in like this. So that should be good to go as well. Now we need an event to interpolate the FOV back to the default if we exit the camera. So I'm gonna create another custom event, and that's going to be reset FOV. So let me see, I want to get my scene capture component in here and get the field of view that it's currently at. And let me see, I'm gonna use interpolate. So let's interpolate our current field of view, interp2. And we're going to interpolate to our default FOV, but we need to make a variable for that because we don't have it yet. So let's go to the construction script, and right at the end here we're going to drag off our scene capture component and get our current field of view, and we're going to promote that to a variable, and that's our default FOV. And then we can use that to set it. So compile and save, make sure we connect up the setter. So we're going to interpolate to our default FOV. Let's get our world delta seconds, and interp speed of something like 5 maybe. We can change it later, so no issues over there. Now we're going to set our FOV angle again. So get the camera component, set field of view, and we're going to set it to the return value of the interp node. Plug this into the event node, and let's add a delay, world delta seconds. And then to make sure, we're going to check if our scene capture component is still valid. It might have been destroyed in the very short meantime, you never know. And then if it's still valid, we're going to see if we are not manually controlled. And if we are back at our FOV, so let's get our manually controlled boolean in here. And then let's get an end node, get the scene capture component, and get our field of view. And make sure that it's nearly equal. And we're gonna make sure that it's nearly equal to our default FOV. And I'm gonna lower this a little bit, so 0.05, something like that. So we're not gonna keep interpolating forever. And plug the false pin back into the FOV setter over here. So now we should be able to nice and smoothly reset the FOV if we exit the camera. So that should do it for the control events on the camera itself. And now we need to go to the player controller, and we're going to add the keybinds so it actually works. So back in our player controller, we're going to add the keybinds to make sure everything works. So first of all, let's go to the quit event. We're going to add some stuff because now we're also able to go back from camera controls to the interface. So let's drag off the camera pin over here, and we're going to change the input type. So if we go back from the interface, we want to change the controls back to interface. And then we need to make sure that we have authority or not. So let's drag off here and get the switch has authority node. And if we are the server, we want to set the manual control on the camera. So let's get the controlled camera in here. Drag off here and set manual control. And we're going to set that to false. Then we want to reset the FOV of the camera. So we need to call the function that we created for that, reset FOV. And then the last thing we need to do is set the controlled camera over here back to nothing. So let's get a setter over here and make sure you leave that empty. And for the client, we need a separate replicated function for this. So we're going to create a custom event and we're going to call it server stop camera control. So custom event, server stop camera control. And for this, we need to make sure that it's replicated to run on server. So the clients can call this event from here. So server stop camera control. And for the camera control, we need to plug in the controlled camera. So we're going to set all of this stuff. So we're going to copy and paste it. And now we can simply drag on one of these pins onto the node. So it'll create the variable for the security cam. And this is our controlled camera. Make sure you connect it up to the setter as well. And over here, we need to plug in the controlled camera into the event call. And now we should be good to go over here. That should work. So let's create the other events for moving the camera and to actually zoom in and out and that kind of stuff. And that does remind me that for the input events, I need to make sure that I do not consume input over here. So because we're also using the W and the S key later on, for example, if I do not deselect this, then I won't be able to control my character later on. So make sure you disable consume input. And then let's continue with the events. So first of all, let's create the manual control event. So let's create a keyboard event for the key E. So keyboard E. And this is the key we're going to use to access our camera control. First of all, we need to make sure that we are in the camera interface. And then we're going to drag off and we need to make sure that the current camera is not destroyed, because then we cannot control it. So get a branch over here, drag off the interface pin. And then we're going to get our security terminal reference. And from here, we're going to get the camera blueprint array. And also get the current index from the security terminal. So get current index. Make sure we get the correct camera. So drag off the array, get the current index from it. And we need to make sure that it is destroyed. So look for is destroyed or not. And plug this into the condition over here. So if the camera is not destroyed, then we want to know if we are the server or not. So has authority. And then we can call the events that we should have created previously, I think. Did we? I'm not even sure, but we're gonna see. So I'm gonna drag off the camera over here and I'm gonna call my server. No, we didn't create them. Dang it. Okay. So, well, first of all, let's drag off the authority pin then, and we're gonna get the camera over here. And we're going to simply set manual control. And we're going to set this to true. And then we're also going to set the controlled camera on this blueprint. So drag on a setter over here. And that's the blueprint that we have over here. So we can plug it in like this. And then after that, we want to change the input type to be security camera. So we're going to change input type, and we are controlling a camera now. So change it to camera. So we need an event for clients for this, and we need to create it on the controller. So that's where we currently are. And let's just add the event over here then. Create a custom event, and that's our server control camera event. So we're going to tell the server that we want to control a camera. We need to get these two nodes in here and paste them over here. I'm going to drag this onto the event node, make sure plug in both and rename it. That's the camera blueprint. Now this should be replicated to run on server. And then we can call it from here. So server control camera. And make sure we plug in the camera blueprint over here, and that should work for clients as well. And we can simply continue by setting the input type just like this. So these are input events, they are local, so we don't need to check for this event. We can simply set it. We know we are the local controller, so that works. So we have that set up as well. Now we're going to set up the movement for the camera with the mouse. So let's get the input axis. And that's input axis turn. If you want to do this for a joystick, for example, you need to get the other one. So that's the, let me see, input axis, the look, I think. So the look ones are for the controllers and for the turn ones are for mouse, I'm pretty sure. So you need to get the correct one, but turn. Again, we're going to check if we are in the correct input type event. So this time we need to make sure we are controlling a camera. So we're also going to get our controlled camera in here and make sure that it's valid. Drag off the camera pin this time. And then if the camera is valid, we're going to check if we are authority or not. So drag off here as authority. Oh, come on. And if we have authority, we're going to call the add yaw rotation on the camera. So we're going to drag off the controlled camera, add a yaw rotation, and we can plug in the value from the event. So that's the server version. And for the client, we need to create a replicated one. So we're going to create a custom event, and that's our server add yaw rotation. So make sure that replicates to run on server, and then we're going to call our add yaw rotation event and plug in the pins to create the variables and call the server version for the client. So server add yaw rotation, and make sure you connect up the variables. So we should be good to go. Let's do the same thing for moving the mouse up and down. So we have the input axis lookup. Okay, so I was messing up. Turn and lookup, that's for the mouse, and the lookup rate and turn rate are for controllers. That's how it should be. So we're going to get our lookup event. Again, we're going to copy these first nodes over here. Well, actually, let's copy these 3 nodes over here. So make sure we have camera control switched on, the camera is valid, and we need to know if we are the server or not. If we are the server, we're going to add the pitch rotation to the camera directly and plug in the value from the event node. And for clients, we need a replicated event again, so let's create a custom event. Server, add pitch rotation. So replicate it to run on server, and we're going to call our add pitch rotation event. Plug in our variables. Oh, come on. And call it from the remote pin over here. So server add pitch rotation and connect everything up. Now we need to do the zoom in and out event. So that's going to be our input axis move forward and move backward. So let's get our input axis, move forward, and we need to know if all of this stuff is happening or not. So we're going to copy and paste it, make sure we are camera controlled, etc, etc. Now let me see. So for the server we can call our add camera FOV, connect it up and plug in the value. And for clients, you guessed it, we need a replicated event. So server add camera FOV, replicate it to run on server, call our add camera FOV event, get the variables plugged in, and call this one for the client. That's not correct. So like that. That should be good to go. So I think we have all of the events created. Now I do need to make sure I'm not consuming input. So disable consume input for all of these events. And I think we should be good to go to test it. So let's see what happens. Hopefully it works the first time this time, but you never know. So host is first up. I'm going to access the screen. We have our manual control, previous camera, next camera. I'm focused on the client, so that's why the camera is not moving. Let me get out of the trigger. And now it's focused on myself. So again, it's not moving. Let me get out of the trigger. So it's moving. You can see that's still working. So I can cycle through cameras. That was already working. Now I'm going to manually control it. And I can look around with the mouse. I can zoom in, W and S, I can zoom out. And if I press Q, I go back to the previous screen and the camera goes back to its own. So it's focused on me, so that's why it's not moving again. And I can also control the other camera, hopefully, and zoom in. And you can see it's also showing on the screen. And if I press Q twice, then I'll exit the terminal. So far so good. Let's see if everything is working for the client as well. I wanted to make it a little bit bigger actually. So let's see. Interact with the terminal. We can cycle through the cameras and we should be able to control them, which we are. So that's good. And let's try and control the other camera as well. So that's working, and on the screen you can see it's actually changing when I'm moving it around, so that's working as well. And if I back out, it goes smoothly back into its own movement, so that's working as well. So I think we have everything pretty much set up now. There's one more thing I do want to show, and that's if you want to add multiple camera systems. So for example, if you would want to add another terminal, you can simply drag in a second security terminal. And then you can also assign separate cameras to that one. So for example, I'm going to drag in a camera over here. And we need to make sure that we set it up this time. So let's assign some variables. -40, something like that. Search angle of 80. And now here's the thing. If you want to create a second group of cameras, you need to create a new render target for that one. So we can duplicate the texture render target and we're simply going to increase the index. So if I assign this one to the second set of cameras, then that should work. So this should be camera 1, for example. And then I also need to select the security terminal and make sure that one is using this render target as well. And then I can assign the cameras to this terminal. So with the little eyedropper, just click the camera and it's added to the terminal. And I can copy this camera to make things a little easier. So we have 3 cameras added to that terminal, and we can change the name, so camera 3 and camera 2. And then we need to get the security terminal and make sure that we add them to the array. So 3 cameras. And simply click them to add them. And now everything should still work, so hopefully that's the case. So we have a second terminal over here. And this should show different cameras, and if we interact with it, so we can see this is camera 1, 2 and 3. And if the host will look at the screen over here, then the only issue is that I cannot interact with this screen right now because the other player is interacting with this terminal. And that's because I cannot change the UI render targets, so I'm not sure how to make a dynamic material for a HUD. So if I can figure that out, I could remove that limitation as well. So this is the only limitation currently. The 2 terminals cannot be used at the same time, and other than that, everything should work fine. So we have a fully working and controllable camera system set up for multiplayer. Thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video or you think you might have learned something, please consider leaving a like. I'll be back for more.